Hello, today is July 21st, 2021. And if you are here for the webinar entitled Expectations versus Reality, Unveiling New Research About the Knowledge Experience from Frost Sullivan, and brought to you by Zoomin, you are in the right place. My name is Scott Abel, and I'll be the host of today's show. Here's a few things you should know about our webinar platform. If you're new, you don't have to worry. We can't see or hear you. We do not have access to your camera or your microphone. And while you cannot have a two-way conversation with us, what you can do is ask a question using the Ask a Question tab located underneath your webinar viewing panel. Clicking that button will allow you to have a little text window open where you can submit a question to us. If you'd like us to know who you are in your question, put your name in there. We cannot text you back. Just keep that in mind. During the show, you'll be asked and prompted to answer some polls. We'd appreciate it if you did that. They're little multiple choice polls. You'll have to come out of full screen viewing mode in order to participate in the poll. There'll be a graphic user interface that will prompt you, and it's simply a matter of clicking a multiple choice answer, and your answer will then be aggregated with the rest of the audience, and that will help the presenters know a little bit more about you and your content needs. Also, there's additional content today located in the attachments section of your webinar viewing panel that actually has some clickable links that will take you to the sponsor of our show and also to some content related to the topic of today's show. There's also a couple of downloadable documents in there and some troubleshooting information in case you were to have trouble on today's show using the BrightTalk technology. Additionally, that help information includes some contact center information so that the BrightTalk team can help you overcome any challenges you might have. Additionally, at the end of the show, we'll ask you for some feedback using our 1 through 5 star rating system, where 5 is a high rating. There's also a small text field that allows you to share comments with the presenters about the rating that you gave them or anything else that you'd like to share with them. And I know that they view this information and care about your feedback, so do consider doing that before you leave today. We'd appreciate it very much. Welcome to our digital stage, our first guest and our co-host today, who's going to drive this presentation forward, Megan Gilhooly. Megan, are you on the line?
Hey, Scott, I'm here. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for asking. Where are you broadcasting from today?
I am actually in our New York office, which is super cool. We're having a little get together with folks that we've hired during the pandemic that I've never met. So we're having a really good time here in New York.
That's great. Can you tell the audience who you are in case they might not be familiar with you and what your connection to today's topic is?
Yes, absolutely. So I am the VP of Customer Experience at Zoomin. And Zoomin is a tool that ingests content from multiple sources and then pushes it out to multiple places in a unified manner. And so content is really our business. And so we're really excited about this UX survey that we did. And I'm excited to move on and bring in our guest. Can I do that now?
Yes, let's do it. Let's bring him on.
Excellent. So our guest today is Malachy Lavelle. And he's a longtime customer that I've known for a number of years and just an amazing guy. He's head of global documentation at Avaya. And he is coming to us from Ireland. So it is Malachy, not Malachi, right, Malachy?
That's correct, Megan. And thanks for the welcome.
Welcome to the show. We're very excited to have you. All right. So we're going to do some kind of coming off of the slides and doing some FaceTime and going back and forth. So just kind of bear with us on that. But I do want to go through the basics of this survey. So again, we're talking about expectations versus reality, and we really wanted to dive into what is it about the knowledge experience that we might be missing? What are some of those blind spots we may have had? And so here's the methodology that we used. We conducted this through a third-party research firm called Frost Sullivan, and it was conducted in May and June of this year. So it's important to know that the data you see is very, very fresh. The demographics of the folks that we went out to, we kind of had two separate cohorts that we looked at. One was Doc Portal users. So these are folks that are in the US, Canada, and the UK. They work in medium or large size enterprises. It's important to note that they are heavy doc users. So they use product and tech documentation 4 times a month or more. So that's an important note. And they've also indicated that they've used a tech doc portal in the past year. So this is really important information about their demographic. And then the flip side of it is where we're trying to see some of the blind spots are with the leaders over customer experience and customer success. So these are not necessarily people leading documentation portals. They're people that are really focused on the customer. And again, majority of them in the US, with others in Canada and the UK. And they lead teams in these medium and large enterprises. And they needed to be senior management or executive. So they're very, very high level leaders. So when we look at the participants by industry, you'll notice the leaders that came in were all within the tech industry. They were all within hardware and software. The users, on the other hand, are a little bit more split. The majority of them were in hardware and software, but we've also got manufacturing, we've got finance, and we've got healthcare. So we've got kind of a good split there. And when we divide that up into just tech versus other, you'll see this happen throughout the slide. Tech will be hardware and software to sort of match what the leaders are. And then sometimes we'll look at the difference between tech and then the others. So it'll be important for you to remember that. So that's the nitty-gritty details. So let's go ahead and dive in. So the first one we want to talk about, the first question, is all about where do users first seek technical information? And this is, of course, important to understand. Now, when you first look at this, I'm going to go ahead and read all of the data, because if it's too small on your phone or if you have any issue with seeing the words, I want to make sure that you see what's there. So that big chunk on the right, the lighter blue chunk, says doc portal, and that was 53%. The orange chunk on the bottom left is search engine at 32%. Community and forums is gray with 6%. And ask a colleague is yellow with 6%. And then that little dark blue sliver at the top is contact support at 3%. And so it's important to note again, these are heavy doc users. Therefore, it's not that surprising that the doc portal ranks high. Perhaps maybe how high is a little surprising. But Malachy, just given what you see here, are there any big surprises for you?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the biggest surprises, where we have 3/4 of the population is tech users, is the low take-up of community forums. Because they kind of started off as techie people kinds of things, and I really was surprised to see that was quite so low. So much lower than the search engine even, and I thought the search engine might have scored a good deal higher. So the first kind of point coming out to me about this data is it's already started to challenge my assumptions about the users, and especially about tech users.
Very good. Yeah, I agree. I think it's it is surprising to look and see these numbers, but let's do a little comparison here, and that comparison will be between what the doc portal users indicated versus what the CS and CX leaders' perception is. And so when we look at this, it's a much different picture, right? And it maybe lines up a little more with what you were talking about, except they really still do have a sliver on contact support. So in this one, doc portal is 23% in the lighter blue, search engine 46%, the big orange one at the bottom, community and forum 25%. Maybe not surprising given that the CSCX leaders usually lead the community and forum, and so maybe that's what they're sort of being a little gracious, maybe, but such a difference there. Ask a colleague 4%. And contact support at 2%. So what are some of the differences or the surprises you see here?
I think it's more of a difference than a surprise, Megan. To see that there's a difference between leaders' perception and users' perception is hardly news to most people. I suppose one of the things that's interesting that's the same is this low dependency on asking support, and this that in general people are saying there's a big move towards self-service. But you see a major delta between, again, this assumption that search engine is high, and that might be just skewed by the people who we surveyed, and maybe that's why doc portal is so high. But also, as you said, again, the community forum, just like myself, most of the leaders thought that would be a bigger part of the picture, but that's not what the user data is telling us. I thought it was quite, the ask a colleague number to me is quite interesting. We'll talk about it, I guess, in another slide, but that leaders thought people would be even less likely to ask a colleague than users. Kind of interesting perspective there. I don't know exactly what it tells us, though.
Yeah. Yeah, you do kind of think of it. And I kind of wonder how much the pandemic actually impacted that, right? Like before the pandemic, people were sitting in offices next to each other, and maybe they felt they were more likely. And we've had such a big push for digital transformation just because of this this new world that we're living in, right? So I wonder if that had anything to do with it. I'm not quite sure. Do you have any ideas?
I guess it could be part of it. And the way the world of work has changed, you don't necessarily have that person sitting beside you. But it may also be some other aspects to it. And I think the next slide we'll look at a difference between the tech users and the other users that may also give us some insight.
Yeah.
I found this slide really interesting in many ways. So if we're talking about ask a colleague, tech users markedly less than other users, and then when we look at some of the other figures, like how heavily they use the doc portal versus and the search engine is about the same. I'm just getting this idea, which I would kind of see coming through in the support context that we get, that technology users are more independent. And when we see here that they're less likely to ask a colleague, less likely to go to a community forum, much more likely to go to the doc portal, I think that and again, we see it in some of these other figures, it's telling us about a difference between these user types, which is quite important because that starts to give us information about the audience that we are trying to connect with. I was really surprised to see that on this slide, the contact support was low, and similarly low on both the tech industry and the other users.
Yeah.
And I would have thought, most people want to go talk to somebody. And I am left wondering, is part of the contact support is maybe like the idea of demand destruction, that we've made contacting other humans so difficult now with IVR systems and waiting in queues and maybe intercepting with bots, that people just, they don't consider it as a good option anymore. So I don't know if that's the truth, but I thought it was just a very interesting slice to see that talking to other humans is actually so low on this whole scale.
It really is. And I just want to make sure that everyone can see the blue bars on the left of each duo is tech, and the orange bar on the right of each duo is other. And one of the other things that it made me think about was, is this really actually about adoption of a doc portal? Because again, we're talking to people here who use documentation portals, who use technical documentation. So is there an adoption aspect here where if you can get bigger adoption of your tech content portal, if you have a better tech content portal, does that lead to that really low contact support rate? And so we're going to dive into some of that in just a bit. But do you have any thoughts on that idea of adopting the doc portal and what you've seen since you've sort of improved your doc portal?
Absolutely. There's no doubt, and you see it coming in customer feedback all the time, that if it's easy for people to use and accessible, they'll use it. And later on, we'll talk about the idea of trust, because if they trust it, they'll also use it. And we certainly have had that feedback coming, a little bit more positive feedback on the doc portal. It's always hard to get positive feedback. you tend to get a lot less of that than you get negative feedback, but just a little bit more in terms of the doc center makes things just that bit easier to find, that bit easier to access, and that then encourages people to use it again. So I think that is an aspect to the adoption story.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's another way to look at it. It's basically the same data, but we're now splitting it instead of between the just the other and the tech users. We're looking at self-service versus human touch. So if I went back a slide, if we think about contact support and ask a colleague as human touch, and then community forum, search engine, and doc portal would all be part of self-service, then we see a really strong indication here. Now, even if we sort of account for this difference of these are people that will self-serve, this is still a massive, massive gap. And I think there's a couple interesting things here. So the top line is the leaders, what the leaders' perception is of how much people will self-serve on their self-service tools versus how much they want to contact a human, either ask a colleague or contact support. And then below the red line, we have it broken down: other users, tech users, and all users. Now, if you remember back, the demographics of the CSCX folks, they're the tech leaders. And so if we look just at tech users, it's very similar, right? Like tech users versus all leaders, they really have a very similar idea. So there seems to be a bit of alignment here on how important it is for having really good self-service. Do you agree?
I do agree. I think the one thing to be careful of here is that you see this confirmation bias where the two tech communities are agreeing with each other. So the thing I like to see on this slide is, while there's in this general trend that people prefer self-service, and that's quite good and encouraging, it's less so with other users, and that's something really important to consider, that the audience that you're writing into. So for example, we produce large unified communication solutions, very large contact center solutions, but we also produce end user products and even retail products since the pandemic started, of small conference systems, telephones, video cameras, and you see a marked difference in the queries and the feedback you get coming from those different types of users. So I think parts of the slide are completely unsurprising. The fact that maybe the tech leaders think that self-service is even more important than just by a small amount. But the really key thing I would take away here is, if you're selling it to software, you're probably okay, because your own what your experience is maps to your customer experience. If you're selling into other industries, if you're selling either software devices into other industries, just be aware of this aspect that those people don't necessarily think exactly the same way we do, and that might be something you have to take into account, both in the material you provide and how you provide it.
That's such a great point. Totally agree with that. Definitely something we need to know, and we need to understand our audience for sure. So we're going to shift just a bit from where people seek information to how easy is it for them to actually use it. So what is this doc portal user experience like for them? And so we will start with the question that was, overall, how would you describe your average experience in looking for relevant technical content for professional usage? So again, we have people that are very adept at using tech content. So presumably they should be very good at it, right? And if we look at this, the light blue on the top right, that slice is the 13% that said it's extremely challenging. We go down to the right to somewhat challenging at 29%. Neutral is 22% in the gray there. Then the left piece of pie, 25% quite easy in yellow. And then the very top left, extremely easy, 11% there in the dark blue. So if we divide this into, basically some degree of easy versus some degree of challenging, it's sort of even, right? Like we've got roughly 36% indicate it's fairly easy and 42% say fairly challenging. And then 22% are neutral, which might mean it's so-so, or it might mean sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's challenging, really. So it could mean either of those. But are there any surprises here for you?
I don't believe so. I think one of the, we as tech professionals, all of us really try to compartmentalize information and break it up and make it findable and work on our taxonomies. But there's just so much out there. If you even think of the personal searches you do, there are so many potential hits, and searchability and finding stuff is such a difficult area. If you could solve that, you would you probably would, and you could patent it, you'd probably make a lot of money. But it's hard because every individual thinks differently, searches differently. I'm not overly surprised, and I think there are some underlying data. I can't remember if we have them on the slides that we were going to talk about later about the difficulties that would illustrate this. But definitely a key thread I would see coming through in the type of feedback is that people do find it hard to find information. They probably find it more difficult on traditional PDF or online help files. That would be the experience I would see, where sometimes I will get the query based on a topic that they've linked to from a help file, for example, and the information they need is just in the previous topic, but it's not obvious to them that that's the case. And the other case I would see where people have a lot of difficulty is they're searching for something using a synonym that we haven't mapped in our index terms, or they're searching for an answer that isn't there, which may apply to the very technical users. And that would be, again, a constant type of query you'd see coming in, where they're asking a question that the books don't answer. And I can imagine that before they punched the button to send me a message, they had probably done quite a bit of searching to try and find out themselves. We can't hear you, Megan. I think you're on mute.
Is it tough? But let's talk about what the leaders think. So this is, how would your customers describe their average experience in looking for tech content on your tech doc portal? And so again, blue, extremely challenging, 14%. Somewhat challenging in orange, 12%. Neutral is 9%. In gray, the big chunk at the bottom, quite easy, 44%. And then extremely easy in blue at 21%. So this is a pretty marked difference, right? Like this definitely differs from what the users were indicating. And so in this case, if we combine all of the things that would be considered challenging, we're looking at only 26% versus any form of easy comes out at 65%. So this is a much, much bigger difference. What do you think of this difference?
I imagine a lot of people on the call aren't surprised to see that senior leadership are being more optimistic than maybe the troops on the ground. It's such a fantastic comparator. The folks in the trenches trying to use your portal are having a tough time. And if we were to split the neutral score down the middle, it's almost the opposite. 60% of people are finding it challenging and really hard. And I would say that big neutral cone in the middle of the users mostly leans towards difficult, whereas there's a lot less neutrality with the leaders, and there's this really much more positive perception. To me, this is just people working off different perceptions. If you're a leader, what happens? People come in, they show you stuff, they demo to you. The demo is always the best case. Everything works well. Sometimes your demos don't work, but usually the leader receives a great demo. It's pre-scripted. They have interesting people talking on it, and it all looks good. And that's not the reality with with what the user experience is, especially after you scale, because when you start to scale when you start off with your little portal, it usually works pretty slickly, and when you start to scale it, that's when the challenges come in. So I think this really underlines the need for usability testing. And we had an analogous kind of story a few years back about the same time I took over this role, where our one of our portals at the time, which would have been serving PDF document, had been relaunched. People thought it was great, and I think some customer feedback started to trickle in, and they did usability testing, and the usability testing surfaced what pretty much anybody on the team could have told us, which was you get too many results for certain types of search. Some parts of this taxonomy aren't really working that well. They probably worked really well for the first 6 months till the numbers of knowledge-based articles started to balloon. And now you're hitting something that looks like the right taxonomy and you're just getting like 130 choices. And like the most relevant one might be at the bottom. So the usability testing was key in changing our perception of that and saying, you know, we can show you that this is not doing as good a job as you thought, even though we all knew it. But nobody wants to stick their head out of the shell on no data.
Yeah.
You may not get forgiven. However, what you can do is say, hey, maybe we should run some usability tests on this, and then you can get the data, and then it's fact-based, so it gives you that basis for saying, here are the real pain points.
That's a really important point to make, I think. I'm editing the Society for Technical Communication Journal's magazine Intercom this month, and we did an entire issue on science-based design. We invited no technical writers to submit content for this because there aren't very many scientific technical writers, actually. So we invited neuroscientists and scientists who study perception, how the mind works, how the eyes work, how reading works, how speaking works. And they all came up with this idea that if we informed our decisions with science-based data at first, we would stand a better chance of not having to rework things as often. Now, they did not say that science is the be all end all, and whatever the science is today is the science tomorrow. I think what they were getting at is if you drive from the data and then you ignore what we think and what we feel, you probably will miss one iteration. You'll skip it because you'll learn some things from the data and you'll make smarter decisions. So I think you're right on with that usability testing thing. And I also wonder if maybe having a third party or somebody who doesn't have a stake in the outcome to do the usability test might also avoid some of the bias that you mentioned earlier.
It's a general principle of test. I worked as a tester for 12 years. That sense of independence, and you need independence both in gathering the data and in presenting it and highlighting the learnings. Absolutely.
And have you been able to do that at Avaya? Have you been able to say to the people who are passionate about stuff, yes, I totally see your passion, but we need to go have real human beings work through this to see if they behave in the way you expect them to?
Absolutely, and that's. But I think that's true of many different. It's not just true of doc centers. We're all a little bit vulnerable to picking up our own biases and running with them.
I certainly am.
Hands up. I'll put up 2 hands.
Yes.
And so you do need to have that sort of self-checking. All right. Well, not self-checking, but self-checking to get someone else to check that, yes, you're on the right path. And we have had, we've used mainly internal teams, but for example, our Avaya Learning team, which works with the APS training and sales training, have them come in and have a look at it. And their experience is different. They're in a different functional area. The people that they work with are different. So they come in with a very, very different perception. It's the same as trying to find spelling mistakes in your own work. You can look at it as long as you want.
Yeah, you'll read what you think you wrote.
You made the mistakes, so you're not going to see it. And,
absolutely.
And, just so, that's the way it is. So get over it. You know?
So this brings up a really interesting dilemma that a lot of doc portal or tech doc creators face, which is we have these wonderful doc portals that we build, right? And we, of course, create the most amazing content for them. And we're always thinking about the customers first, right? So clearly we're doing a great job, and therefore our doc portal should be, close to perfect, right? Now, we all know that that's not true. We know that the bar goes up from the customers. We know that the world changes. All of a sudden we have a pandemic, and now the needs change or whatever it is. So we're always changing. So we have some little facts here that we can kind of go through. Like, for example, this one, 73% of users indicate they visit more than 3 sites to find the right answer. So let's say you're doing usability studies and you recognize that 73% of your folks actually have to visit, let's say, 5 sites in order to get the right answer. How do you then go to the people who will give you the budget to fix this problem without calling your baby ugly? That is one of the biggest dilemmas I find in tech content. What do you guys think?
I wonder sometimes if you do sometimes have to mention the ugly baby, maybe better analogy, but the problem, right? You do have to point it out. It's about how you do it, I think. I think if it's perceived as griping, it's maybe more likely to go in a direction you didn't expect or that you didn't desire. But if you were to say, some companies are doing this and they're having success, we seem to have the same problem they used to have. Here's how they solved it. Maybe this is something we could pursue. You might open a door, for them. But I don't know that jumping in with those numbers is the thing. Like, but what if you knew? What if you knew, though, that your average user that you surveyed yourself said that they're frustrated that they have to jump around your site 5 or 6 times to find the answer? I think that's something meaningful that a leader would say, wait, we don't want them doing 5 attempts to get one answer. Malachy, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's 2 key things that I've certainly learned in the last few years. One, always come in with a positive self-improvement story. So it's like a growth mentality. You can identify, you can point to the problem, or you can talk to the better performance or the better outcome.
Sure.
And I've experienced that across all my activities, not just work, but as a scout leader, working with young people, in choirs, in all sorts of areas of life. So part of your approach is, as you said, even if it was to say these other companies are doing this, I wouldn't even say they used to have a problem. I would just say these other companies are doing it. They're doing better at these metrics. And then, as you said, the next part of every good communication is fact-based.
Right.
If you got the data underneath your belt, then it has credibility. It has trust. If you just come in and make a statement, well, it might or might not be true. And here we are looking at figures to see, what does it tell us about things we used to think? So you need to come in with those figures. And that's where, again, being able to, even if you do an informal usability study with maybe a partner connect group or with a user group,
right,
then you have some background. And I think that's really the way to approach it is
I love that.
Look for the improved performance. Always focus on the improved performance. Because as we saw, these guys think positively. They have a bias towards positivity, and that's reasonable. There's nothing wrong with that. It has to be also underpinned with some good solid structure to make sure it's realistic.
Right. And sometimes if you focus on the change the world is having, as opposed to how you screwed up your doc portal, right? Like if it's something you did wrong, that's a little harder. But anyway, let's dive into really comparing the tech industry to other industries. So in this case, again, the blue bar on the left in each duo is tech, and on the right, the orange bar is other. We start with extremely challenging at the left, then go somewhat challenging, neutral, quite easy, and extremely easy. So are there any, aside from what we've already discussed, are there any sort of new aha moments that come out of this slide for either of you guys?
I think we've tapped on it once or twice already in the presentation, but what's really was unexpected for me when I saw this was that other industries found it they found it less extremely challenging and and less somewhat challenging than the tech industries, and I was really quite surprised by that. So what did it make me think? I don't know if you're familiar with John Carroll's work, the Nuremberg funnel and minimalist documentation, but that idea that people learning software documentation, which back in 1990 was mostly tech users, are impatient, mentally active, and curious. They try and figure things out for themselves. They find documentation gets in the way. I think that might be one of the aspects that, talks about their personality. So they probably figure out easy stuff for themselves without going to docs, and then by the time they get to the portal, they're asking much harder questions. And I would see that coming through in
I could see
the
that.
questions I get from somebody who's head of IT or clearly a technical person. It's really something that the book doesn't answer. Their thought has gone past what we're offering to the customer. And sorry, go on.
I was just going to wonder, it makes me wonder if your point, if the data would show up differently if we monitored how easy it was for somebody. Let's say they believe, because sometimes people believe things that aren't true, right? So we have a bias. I do, certainly, and I'm sure other humans do as well. But we believe that something's easy, but maybe our expectations are set by the mediocre experiences we have. So my partner doesn't have the peculiarity that I do. I want to have the experience be really great, but I know too much about why the experience could be better. And I wonder if those charts, when you ask people, if they know so much about it, they know what they consider acceptable. Whereas my mom is less tolerant of some things, but she won't complain about anything we talk about.
So I think what we're saying then is folks in the tech industry are more persnickety. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I think so. Well, and aware, right? And if you measured their actual clicks to see if they took 7 clicks or 13 clicks, that might actually not agree with their perception of how easy it is. Because a developer, for example, once told me, and I've used this in lots of speeches, all you have to do is, like I said, there's a problem with our customer, and he said, all the customer has to do is blah, 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 blah. To him, it was totally simple, but it was 3 confusing things the user had never done before. So to them, it's like, why are they asking me to do new stuff? Can't they make it work like other things I'm already familiar with?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that familiarity plays a role.
Again, goes into the whole area of confidence and trust. And I don't want to run way over time, but recently, while trying to understand the Greek alphabet, because she was looking at all the variants of COVID-19, my wife set her mobile device to Greek, and then she accidentally set the whole thing to Greek. So then, over days, she was trying to pair it back, and she got some of it back, but still things were coming up in Greek. So I actually don't use a smartphone. I use a regular phone. And Megan and I talk about this all the time. I just don't like the interrupts, and I look at a screen all day anyway, so why would I? Yeah. But we started working through it, and I was saying, okay, just click that, go here, follow in my nose like tech people do. And we got to the point where it was, you need to change that. And she just sat back. She was nervous of doing it. I said, just click it. And it's like, oh, what if this happens? I said, I'm sure they've defended against it. When you clicked it, sure enough, it brought you to another screen, which asked you again. But that trust and confidence in non-tech users is so much more important and harder to curate. And I think when we're looking at technology people coming in, they're past all that. So they're looking for tougher stuff. What they come in to me with is edge cases, recovery, troubleshooting, those kinds of things. That's what they're looking for. So it's more nebulous. It's a lot harder to find that with a simple search. And often the queries then are about these things that the docs don't cover. They need a support person to get them in
very particular specifications that are only part of their use case.
And then I think on the other hand, you've the other industry users are just a bit more trusting of documentation. They're more likely to follow the documentation than follow their nose. So they may be coming from that perspective where what they're searching for is more obvious. It's more straightforward. It's a bit more linear.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We do need to move on because we've got a couple more things I want to make sure we get through. So the next topic was really about what's important to these doc portal users. So again, we're asking those users and we're having them rate the average importance of specific factors by user type. So again, tech users, other users, all users, tech on the left, other in the middle, all users on the right. And we looked at factors like updated information, good search and filtering, user-friendly interface, well-structured answers, single integrated source of content, and personalized content. And there's some interesting stuff that came in here. So Malachy, do you want to just kind of dive into some of the stuff you see? And then, Scott, you can feel free to jump in too.
Sure.
For sure. Well, what I love about this slide is it steps down from order of importance, and the updated information is the highest one. Now, I know the differences between these probably aren't enormous, and it's higher with other users again. And I think this gets back again to the whole point of trust. So a query I'll often get is there a later version of this book? Or is there a later version of this content? Um, and sometimes there isn't. And the person has found the most recent one, but it's a couple of years old. And you can see that that's eroded their trust because they think there might be something more up to date. But on the other end of the scale, we got personalized content, and it's a lot. It's the least important thing, which is quite interesting, and it's a lot less important to other users than tech users. Now, if we look back at when we mapped how the leaders on certain scores were very much aligned with the tech users, and they may have that bias, I think this is one to be careful of, because with these figures, why would you invest heavily in personalized content when maybe you should be investing more in the core things, updated information, um, good search and filtering. So can people find it, and is it an easy interface for them to use? So they would be my takeaways. And I think these are pretty important if you were looking at investment decisions, because things like personalized content get a lot of airtime. But what this set of figures, anyway, again from heavy tech doc users, is telling us is they're not as
Again, I
interested.
kind of wonder though, back to Scott's point, is there a
I would
difference
push back on
between
that.
perception?
Okay.
Right? Because like
Well,
these
perception,
folks
yes.
are going home to Netflix and they're having hyper personalized experiences.
Exactly.
How are they not bringing that expectation back to work? Are they maybe just not aware that they have that expectation? Right.
Let's think about it another way. You're at work and you have a problem and you have to call a vendor, and you call their support center and they put you on hold, and you walk through the number tree. You push 1, you push 2, you get disconnected. You call back, you do the same thing. Finally, you get to the person who says, "I understand what kind of problem you have, but I have to put you on hold to go get a supervisor or do whatever, and then I'll come back." But then they say, "Okay, I can't fix the problem, but Teresa can, and I'm going to direct you to Teresa." And if they transfer you to Teresa and she goes, "Hi, what's your problem?" and you have to start all over again, you would not be happy, because they did not actually care about your personal experience.
That's a fair point, and we're not looking at that. Remember, we're looking at people who don't take that model, the self-serve model, and we're also talking about technical content, which really isn't quite the same as your Netflix experience, because But I agree with you. It's a very surprising result.
It's because we asked people. I mean, I'm gonna butt in and say it's because we asked them and we didn't monitor them. If we monitor them and then we said, "Was this a good experience or not?" and I disconnect them, or I treat them like they're in a group of people instead of individual, I don't think they would have the same rating. I also think that it's hard to know. I don't know if when Megan made the slide, if she renamed the columns so that they would be easy for us to perceive on the show. But could you show it again, Megan? And I'll just show you what I mean. It seems like there's 2 judgmental words in there that, if it's part of the questions, good and friendly are like positive words. Updated just means it's current. It can still be wrong. It just means they updated it yesterday. But if it was wrong, you're not going to be happy, and you won't be having a happy face, and it won't be user friendly, and it won't be good.
I think those are fair points. And I really do think, again, to your point of monitoring, if we showed somebody a site, and these are, say, non-technical people, and we showed them highly technical content, they probably would recognize the lack of personalization. But if we show good personalization, it's almost seamless to them, right? So they might not think it's important because we're already doing it. But I think this is one of those things I would say we'd have to dive deeper to really understand and maybe do the monitoring you're talking about.
There's no doubt.
Go ahead, Malachy. I was just going to say, what do you think about the personalization being related to search and filtering? You don't have to search and filter if you serve up the right content to the user.
Right.
They don't need to go do that.
and possibly part of it is that on a text-based content site, personalization just isn't as obvious. It's not obvious in the same way as it is on Netflix, where it's other people watching watch this. It might just like this is a related topic. Now that might be based on a similar sort of AI underneath. But I think some of these figures do relate to the types of questions I get, and especially the updated content is important. Look, if content's wrong, it doesn't matter whether it's up to date or out of date, for sure.
Exactly.
Anyway, we'll move on because time is passing. But a great slide for discussion. Yeah.
So this one is, and I think we already kind of covered this, but this sort of takes the top line and splits it between tech and others. So these are the folks that said, yes, updated information is absolutely crucial. And this kind of goes to what you kind of already talked about. So we'll just go beyond that. So let's really get to how do we make use of this data? What does this really mean for us as technical communicators and doc leaders? And so this slide, there's a lot here, so just bear with me as I kind of run through it. But in essence, what we did here is we looked at various bands with the question, did tech content impact a purchase? So we said, have you recently purchased a software? And then if yes, the bands came out, was it over $100,000? That would be the light blue. Was it 50K to 99K? That's the orange. Was it 20 to 49K? That's the gray. Was it 5K to 19K? That's the yellow. And was it under 5K? That's the dark blue in the very back. So we have these different bands. The grouping on the left, that's the biggest. Basically, the answer there is yes, we looked at the documentation because we believe it's part of the product. The middle group says, yes, we looked at the documentation, but it was a secondary factor. And then the right-hand side is, no, we didn't look at the technical product content. And so it's super interesting to see that a lot of zeros there, right?
Yeah.
Super interesting to see that more people in the less than 5K band said, no, we didn't look at the content. But incredibly interesting to see how many people say, yes, tech content is part of a product. Again, keeping in mind, these are enterprise folks who look at tech content regularly because they're buying enterprise software. But in the enterprise B2B sort of SaaS world, it's that important. So 88% if it's over 100K. So Malachy, what do you think of this?
Well, it's a great slide for anybody involved in our thing because it's underlining something we already knew, but it's great to see, again, this is the difference between getting figures and having a perception. I think we all know, or at least have worked in places where doc was thought of as, well, we have to have it. It's a box we have to take on the RFI. And this is really telling you, no, actually, your good documentation is really important. And now with cloud industries and lots of other places, as we'll talk about in the next slides, that becomes more and more relevant. So I wouldn't dip into this very much more so than to say they're numbers, you can use them. They're really important numbers to get across to this kind of this rump in the industry that thinks, well, we do doc because we have to do doc. This is saying you got to do doc because it impacts your ability to sell.
Yeah, it ties to revenue, right? Yeah.
It totally does. It might be interesting as a follow-up, if there was ever a survey that could do that, to find out whether or not someone's replacing an existing system. And the reason I asked that is I heard somebody last week say, these are the things we don't like about our current system. We're actually running around checking all of the documentation for the other competing products to see if they've improved that feature that we don't like about our current product. And that was actually guiding them toward other vendors. I don't know that they selected a different vendor for that reason, but they considered other vendors. And then they started looking at their documentation to see, will it be as problematic as the company we currently use?
Yeah. That's interesting, and it's actually part of what we did here.
Awesome.
So we have a couple other little factoids that I'm going to run through, and one of them really relates to that. So I'm just going to kind of go through these four, and then we can discuss all of these. So 86% of executives recognize that people use documentation portals for research before a purchase. This is huge for us, right? Because we now know that they see the importance of it. So that's much different than maybe what it was 20 years ago. Malachy, you and I know, like 20 years ago, people would say, doc portals, what are you talking about? But today we know that they're very important. 84% of people will switch brands if the product content is poor. So this isn't exactly what you're getting at, Scott, but this is sort of an indication of how important it is to have great product content and how content can impact the loyalty of your customers. 91% of people prefer to self-serve over asking another human. We talked about this earlier in the show, but I think it's a really, really important point as we start to wrap up. And then 100% of leaders, every single leader out there said that their company could avoid 10% or more cases if content was more optimized for self-service. That's huge, right? 10% or more. Every leader said yes, absolutely. 61% of the leaders said they could actually avoid more than 50% of cases if they improve their content for self-service. So those are some really interesting metrics. Are there any like gotchas or surprises there for you guys?
I don't think it's a surprise, but I think it's a really good thing for people who are trying to prove the value of content. Because if it's true that leaders instinctively perhaps know that because they're consumers, you know, when they're not busy leading the company, they might be using the same products we're talking about today and the knowledge centers and the documentation as well. I think they get it from a personal point of view that, of course, I won't have to call support if I can find the answer myself. But it does maybe help make the business case if leaders felt like they weren't the only ones who felt that way.
Right. Absolutely.
Like the 100% number is great.
It is. It's crazy, right?
Yeah. I think one to pick out, and you know, I kind of went when I looked at it, for 80% of people would switch brands for better content. And when we're talking to the users, how many of those are decision makers in actually switching? Because for some of my, like I'm a customer too, I have various tools that I use, and for some of them, if I wanted to change, the cost of change is quite high.
Huge.
And maybe my people who are using it might like to change just for doc, but I might have a different perspective. But when I thought about it, now that we moved to software as a service, to more cloud served software, and especially, for example, in RESTful API, where documentation is one of the top 3 factors in terms of adoption, the cost of switching becomes low. If all of my guys are using a telephony service that I basically pay by month, it's a subscription service and it's access to the web, the cost of switching is low. So if my people start grumbling about it,
right,
and documentation is part of it, it's a lot easier for me to make that change now.
It is. So the easier it is to onboard and offboard from different things. And we have standards like DITA that make it easy to switch. And so, yeah, it definitely, I could see it happening, but I do see your point as well, that it would be interesting had we gotten those sort of bands of how sticky is this product within your organization currently, and could you even switch? That's kind of a different question, right?
Yeah, all right. And it might be something sometimes that the average person might not know about. Sorry. I was just to say the average survey participant might not be privy to the decision making that includes the cost of change.
Right.
Well, I can tell you as the leader of a team that's over 70 people, if I start hearing things coming up, I listen to them, and they may impact my decisions. So
absolutely,
it could also work that way.
Absolutely. All right. Well, this has been fabulous, and I want to just run through some takeaways, and then you guys can fill in any that I missed. So I think what we've learned today, first of all, the quality of a documentation portal is super important to customers while they're selecting, using, and or rejecting your company's solutions. We really did find out that people prefer to self-serve, especially folks who have heavy adoption with technical content. These are folks who definitely will self-serve, and we should leverage this preference by trying to reduce their pain with all those things that Malachy mentioned. We also saw that executives really are open to the idea that the customer experience with content specifically is very important, and we can use these numbers to kind of crystallize that. And so we really came up with this as a door you should sort of push wider and see where it can go. The most important factors to focus on, according to this survey, were updating information, high quality search and filtering, and user-friendly interface. But as Scott and I kind of pushed back on, that maybe the self-reporting aspect of it might have biased it a bit. And so perhaps the personalized content is more important, but if we're already doing a decent job at it, that maybe they're not seeing it, or maybe if we just watched them in their habitat and saw how they interacted with personalization, that may bubble up as more important. And then lastly, your audience really has a bearing on these factors. And Malachy, I think you dove into this really, really well. So if you're selling to tech versus non-tech, you might need to think about what are they sensitive to? Are they extra persnickety? Are they looking for extra details? Are they, how does that change? And I think most of us know we have to write to our audience, but knowing that there's that stark difference between tech and non-tech specifically was super interesting. Do you guys have anything to add? Stumped.
I think it's interesting.
Well,
I think we have to marry it with other kinds of data to come up with a better solution. Megan and I interviewed some folks before who had done eye tracking studies and other things. It would be interesting to watch the actual consumer and their habitat, as Megan mentioned, and compare it to the answers that they gave to see if they hold true.
Well,
I'm sure my answers would be different. I'm sure of that.
That's the thought I just had and then lost, which is why I was looking stumped. I was reading the bullets and I said we didn't mention usability testing, and we should have done, because it's we brought that up early, and then it's come up again, Scott, in your discussions of the personalization and other things. If you're not doing usability testing, you're basically flying in a cloud.
Right.
It's like having to share your draft with somebody. You're going to have to bite that bullet and go out and say, can you guys use this? Here, give it a try and get the feedback. And I think then you'll start to really crystallize some of those other learnings and some of those figures. Absolutely.
Did you ever have any trouble trying to introduce the notion of usability testing? It seems like some people work at companies where that seems to be part of their DNA and they get it from the get-go. And then there's others who say, oh, we could just ask 3 or 4 people. Ask your mom and the person sitting next to you, and that'll be enough.
It's always difficult. And, what do people mean by usability testing?
Right.
Like I said, I've 12 years in QA under my belt, and my perception about testing, even our own internal testing of the portal, like I made assumptions about what our guys would test, and then I had to review the test plans and say, okay, no, we need really to get a lot deeper on this. It's tough. It's actually tough to get it done. It's tough to find people to do it. It's hard to get them to spend the time at it.
Yeah.
But I would say it's like a little cleaning is better than no cleaning. Whatever usability testing you can get is better than no usability testing. And if you can get it from someone outside of your own department, even within your own company, it's still going to pay you dividends in terms of what you learn.
Excellent.
So there are a couple questions from the audience, and I'm going to blow through them because we don't have much time left. So the first is this an opinion, or did the leaders base their perception with data? And they're talking specifically about 61% of leaders said they could avoid 50% more cases with improved content. That is the leader's perception. That's not them going out and doing heavy research on what did happen. That is their perception of what could be avoided with better content. And then, do you consider support's knowledge base part of the doc portal? In my company, the support articles and the product documentation are separate entities. And that's a really interesting question that I'd love to follow up with whoever wrote this. Basically, what we do is we consider content, and we need to, I believe you have to send the same content to the knowledge base that you send to the doc portal, that you send to your in-product help. It should be accessible wherever you are, and all of that stuff should be accessible in all of those places, in my opinion.
This is a really important question, and I could talk for another hour on.
We'll do another one on
content
it.
through the life cycle. But
awesome. We'll have another show.
Yes.
One of the other figures that came through was, remember, people go into lots of different portals. So if you're splitting out your knowledge articles in a separate portal to your documentation, etc., you're making that point of entry tougher on your users. And then the second thing, and this is something I discuss with my colleagues in services all the time, is you may be missing out on things that you could do with an integrated system, like linking your knowledge articles to your documentation when the answer is already there, so you start to increase your user trust in documentation, then they use it more often. Or synonyms, getting those back into your index terms, lots and lots, and there's many more, but
we'll do a whole nother thing on that, Malachy.
That's a whole, exactly.
That's a whole thing.
That's another hour.
Excellent. Well, I will look for some calendar dates for us to do that, and we can come up with an agreement for the new year and come up with some maybe some interesting follow-ups to some of the things that we talked about today. Malachy, thank you very much for joining us today and for being so personable and willing to share what you've learned with others. I really appreciate it. I know Megan and the audience does as well. And Megan, thank you for doing such a good job being the co-host and driving everything forward and helping us understand the data that you were able to collect. And don't forget, audience members, that you can reach out to Megan. I know she's very active on social media, so you can definitely tweet her or check her out on LinkedIn and ask her questions about the platform and how Zoomin software helps consolidate all your product content into one place. I know she'd be happy to help you out and talk to you about that. Here's a couple of shows you might want to know about. In just a few days, we're going to be having one of our favorite guests on the show, Coffee and Content, with myself and Patrick Bozek. We'll be interviewing Andrea Ames, who's going to be talking about how to align what you're asking for, so the budget or money that we kind of talked about today, with the executive priorities. Some of the data that we learned about today may be actually relevant to what Andrea's going to talk about. She's got great insights, and you'll want to join us for that show as well. And then Megan and I will be back to talk with Jennifer Kaufman of NetApp about how to make technical documentations teams that are invisible much more visible to leaders by elevating the value of those teams and communicating to leadership what that value is. And then speaking of value, MacApp Software is bringing together myself and Tina Kister for a talk about science-based instructional design. Tina will make the argument that science-based instructional design content decisions should be based on data and not just what we think, feel, or believe. And finally, we'll have Deborah Vitani join Megan and I on August the 17th to talk about selling TechCom transformation, or transforming your TechCom team, and how you can convince upper management that you may need to do some of that kind of work. My name is Scott Abel. Thanks for joining us today. Please don't forget to use the 1 through 5 star rating system located underneath your webinar viewing panel to give Malachy and Megan a rating today, 1 through 5 stars, with 5 being a high rating. There's also a field in which you can share a little bit of information with them about why you gave them the rating that you did. I know they appreciate it, so make sure to do that. Also, there's some content available in the attachments section of our webinar viewing panel, including contact information for our sponsors and the guest of today's show, and some additional information about the data that we talked about here today. You've been watching our show, Expectations versus Reality, Unveiling New Research About the Knowledge Experience by Zoomin Software, with some data from Frost Sullivan. And we've our guest, Malachy Lavelle from Avaya. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep doing good work, be well, and we'll see you again on another Content Wrangler show in the future. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.